Hello, everybody, and welcome to the July 24th, 2018 edition of the Ephrom Josine Show. I am your host, Ephrom Josine. Now, today we are going to talk about an old friend of the show. I've actually covered him way back in the first episode, believe it or not. He's really the first right-wing commentator I covered on the show, and there's a very good reason for that, because I kind of like him. Well, no, that's misleading. I like him in the same way someone would like an Ed Wood movie. He is just so insane, he's so, I don't want to say moronic, but out there, that I just can't help but find him hilarious. And who is that man? Matt Walsh. Now, Matt, before we begin, I want to say Matt, and I think like 2 episodes directly after this, essentially pulled the "if you don't like it, don't watch it" card when people were criticizing his podcast and saying he wasn't covering interesting topics, which, to be fair, Matt, even when you don't, you make them interesting. Let's be real here. But I want to say this. I don't think Matt Walsh's show is bad, okay? Let me rank the right-wing commentators, in my opinion. At the, I don't want to say good level, but the okay level, there are people like Watson and Crowder and, a few others where I actually do agree with them every now and then. They do pick on low-hanging fruit a lot, but they're still occasionally right, and they are sometimes funny even. Below that is people like Nullis and Hannity, people who aren't funny, aren't particularly interesting, are just kind of boring to me, and are wrong, and are great fodder for responses. Then below that, there are people like Matt Walsh, who I just love hating. Now, before we really get into this episode, because he doesn't really make any new points he hasn't made before, I'd actually like to bring something up, because as Matt actually mentions in the episode, he wrote an article not too long ago about this very same topic, but it was focusing specifically on ADHD. And that article was called, "We Have Turned Childhood into a Mental Disorder and It's Ruining Our Kids." Now, this isn't the only time he talked about it. In the article I covered on this show, "The 4 Terrible Things That Are Destroying Boys in Our Culture," he actually did also mention him being an ADHD denialist. Here's something he had to say. Boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. By high school, 20% of boys are diagnosed. Quick question, and I asked this in the article I wrote, "The Right-Wing War on Mental Health," which you can find over at ephromjosine.blogspot.com. But I asked this, and I couldn't get an answer. If it's really an issue where we're trying to stop childhood, or in that article, trying to stop boys, wouldn't it be 100%? Or at least 90%? Why only 20? That's still a minority. Or as I put it, I get it's easy to look at the 1 in 5 and assume something, I accidentally put bug, something big is going on. But the other side of the coin is 4 in 5. And for that matter, Matt also mentions that boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed. But that means that 1/3 of the people who are diagnosed with ADHD are girls. And it should be noted, by the way, that Matt Walsh does not believe in transgenderism. So it's not even like he's some crazy far-left communist trying to call everybody transgender, which, on a side note, is not a group of people who exist. Instead, he just, I don't get him. It's really that simple. I just really don't get him. Oh, and by the way, speaking of the 20% number, do you know the number of people who, on a side note, because Matt Walsh also is not too big of a fan of homosexuals. You know what the percentage of people who experience some amount of same-sex attraction and are at least slightly homosexual. They are more than what would be considered a 0 on the Kinsey scale, basically. 19%. Almost 20. And yet, oh no. ADHD is perfectly normal, but homosexuality is the issue. It's really the eternal contradiction of, because Matt is essentially a paleoconservative, it's really the eternal contradiction of paleoconservatism, is there's nothing wrong with your brain if we can fix your brain. Because you can't make people not gay, you can't make people not transgender. Well, I mean, I guess technically you could, but there'll always still be that history. And Matt says those things aren't real, but something we can treat. That's not real. Wait, no, that's not real. That's the big issue our society faces. Is, are we over... Can I just be honest? I'm infinitely more worried about us under-medicating a psychopath than I am us over-medicating some 5-year-old. Is that cynical? It's probably cynical. Here's another quote. This isn't from the article, this is from Twitter from him. What is a regular person? Who decides that he is regular? How do you know the regular person isn't actually the irregular person? Or is it possible there's no such thing as a regular? How old is Matt Walsh? That's a serious question, because he has a wife and kids, he looks like he's in his 30s, and yet he talks like he's roughly 14 and just read, and ironically enough, someone like Nietzsche for the first time. But honestly, most of Matt Walsh's shows are really just extended on and more rambling versions of his columns, and I mean that literally. He typically writes a column, then a few days later makes an episode about it. And that may be why, despite backlash from, well, myself, Matt still continued this lie that I personally am still a fan of. He reads a quote from the Mayo Clinic. Any emphasis that I put is his, by the way. He bolded it in the original post. In general, a child shouldn't receive a diagnosis of attention deficit/hyperactivity disorder unless the core symptoms of ADHD create significant problems at home and at school on an ongoing basis. Now, that's actually to stop what people like Matt think is going on, where it's just a personality thing, or it turns on and off, or things like that. But here's how Matt summarizes it in the article, and does the exact same thing in the video, by the way. According to the medical community, a child's personality becomes diseased at the precise moment that his personality interferes with his schooling. And he goes on the video and says, well, diabetes is diabetes in the woods, but ADHD may not be ADHD in the woods. No, if you're continuing to have those problems, ADHD is ADHD in the woods. And you know what? ADHD would actually be kind of annoying in a hunter-gatherer scenario, if you're not paying attention. Although it should be noted that one of the most common theories for ADHD is the hunter versus farmer theory. Which states that it's left over in our genetics from when we were hunter-gatherers that became a disorder as soon as we became farmers. Now, Matt could take that and twist it all kinds of ways, but that's the most commonly cited reason. Honestly, the only new point Matt makes in the video is he talks about how, what is normal? And I remember the example he gave was, if half of the population had 3 arms, who's to say having 3 arms isn't normal? Here's my response to that. There are over 300 things classified as a mental disorder, which Matt also uses as proof that mental disorders are just everyone's being diagnosed with one. Everyone's mentally ill. 50% of the population has a mental disorder. What's wrong with all of them? On a side note, it would have been much more back when the things Matt likes to be mental disorders, you know, homosexuality kind of comes to mind. Were classified as mental illnesses, but I'm ignoring that. However, if there are over 300 battle disorders, it's not a case of having 2 arms or 3 arms. It's a case of having 2 arms to over 300 arms. In which case, yeah, we need to average it out and find out what's going on. I at least think we need to do that on a societal level. Some even think we need to do it at a government level, and that's something I'm mixed on. Anyway, also, for your complaint of Big Pharma, so, what you're saying is, we need to take profit motive out of medicine. So, I guess the liberals were right all along. I'm Ephrom, and good night.